The New Jersey Devils reached the second round of the Stanley Cup Playoffs this year. Trey Matthews of Locked On Devils joins us to discuss the season, the playoffs, and was it enough for the fans in New Jersey? Gil Martin here. The Locked On Road to the Stanley Cup continues as we welcome Trey Matthews of Locked On Devils to take stock of the Devils season and their postseason run. And Trey, what was the biggest reason that the Devils fell in 5 games to the Hurricanes?
You know what? It's just poor defense, poor goaltending at times because I think Akira Schmid held down his ground, but unfortunately, Vitek Vanacek, he was awful in this series once again. And the overall offensive execution, sometimes it was there, sometimes it wasn't. So like in game one, the Devils finished off period number one with only one shot on goal. And to make matters worse, it wasn't even a genuine shot attempt. It was just a dump attempt that just reached Frederik Andersen. So but the Devils offense came alive in game three, but that was all that they could really generate. And then in the final game, game five, unfortunately, they missed some opportunities. So like Timo Meier, he had a golden opportunity to try to put the Devils up by 2 goals. And then Andre Palat, he had a chance late. Great setup by Jesper Bratt. So ultimately, the Devils they waited too long to play their best brand of hockey because despite coming out with the win in game 3, that was not their best effort because while they were able to score 8 goals, they let up 4 goals. So, and 3 of them were shorthanded goals. So that can't happen. So the Devils just waited way too long to get things going. And had they lost in this similar manner in like game 1, 2, or game 4, it would have been a lot more respectable. But the fact that all 3 of those games were blowouts, it just goes to show you that the Devils, unfortunately, they had it in them. They had it in their bag, but I don't know why they always wait until the last second to try to get things going, because I saw in the previous series against the New York Rangers, because they were down 0-2. Game 3 at that moment is a must win because you don't want to go down 3-0. And they had the chance to close out in game 6. They lost that one. And it goes to game 7, and they're able to come away with the win. So they tightrope out of that situation. In this series, once again, they go down 0-2. They're able to win game 3. And then down to the elimination game, the Devils play their best brand of hockey that they could possibly play. But the Carolina Hurricanes, they just always had an answer.
Was there a player or a couple of players who you think most underperformed against Carolina?
Absolutely. So I think Jesper Bratt, he is the big one because he is set to become a restricted free agent and he was set to have a big payday. But given the fact that he didn't really show up in the previous series and the fact that he didn't show up in this series either, it's very concerning a little bit. And there's a debate amongst the Devils discourse, like what do we do with Jesper Bratt? My overall thing is, and I'll talk about it in a future episode once we get to that point, is that I think for Jesper Bratt, it's like, if we're able to re-sign him and he's able to take a pay cut, I think I'll be perfectly fine with him being on the team for the long run. But the priority, given how Timo Meier showed his physicality in the first series against the Rangers and how his offensive execution was able to pick up in round 2, I think Timo Meier is now top priority over Jesper Bratt.
Well, that'll be an interesting thing to look at this offseason. Any bright spots from this particular series that the Devils can take forward into the summer or even into next year?
Absolutely. So you talked about some of the star players underperforming, like I mentioned Jesper Bratt, but they had a lot of people step up their overall game. So in the elimination game, we saw big minutes from John Marino and Luke Hughes. They were able to come up to the plate and just put up some solid production for the Devils on the defensive side of things. Luke Hughes, he played big minutes in that was only his 5th career NHL game. So he had 2 games in the regular season, and then obviously he had 3 games during the course of the postseason. John Marino, we talked early on in the season about his defensive impact, but it finally was put on full display once again during the playoffs. So those are some players that come to mind. Micah McLeod, he was able to have a big showing during the course of the playoffs. I think he is set for an extension, and I think he's going to get paid handsomely because he was a big X factor on the bottom 6. And Eric Haula, a lot of people were clowning on Eric Haula early on in the season, but he has turned out to be a very good glue piece for this Devils team. He was good in the first series, and the second series, he kind of stepped back a little bit, but the Devils are not in that position without Eric Haula. And then for Akira Schmid, what more can I say about him? I call him the Ranger killer right now because he was able to have not one, but 2 shutouts against the Rangers, stepped up big time. And like I said a few moments ago, I do not put the loss on Akira Schmid. He did everything he could potentially do. He saw 39 shots. He was able to save 36 of them. And in games 1 and 2, yes, the Devils did get blown out and Akira Schmid was a starter, but I don't think it's on his shoulders because the reason why he was subbed out, in the words of Lindy Ruff, was just because Lindy Ruff wanted to see a shift of momentum from his team, and it's not on Akira Schmid. The scores would have been a whole lot worse if Akira Schmid wasn't the starter in those games. And he just turned 23 today, so happy birthday to Akira Schmid. But he's very young. He has a lot of upside. He surprised me. I'm sure he surprised himself. And I just want to say Akira Schmid is one of the nicest guys that I've ever spoken to in the locker room. He's so soft-spoken, and everyone loves him. The team loves him. We as media personnel, we love him. So Akira Schmid is definitely turning into a fan favorite. And who knows, given how the goalie situation was during the course of the postseason, maybe we'll see Akira Schmid become the full-fledged starter for the Devils in favor of Vitek Vanecek.
We shall see. And he certainly made a case for himself in the playoffs. I know the answer to this, but I kind of have to ask, does this series loss render your team's season a failure?
Absolutely, 100% no. Because I want to ask you something, Gil. Where did you project the Devils to finish in preseason? And be honest with me.
Be honest, I figured they would just narrowly miss the playoffs, that they would be in the hunt until the last 3 or 4, maybe 2 or 3 games, and that would be their sort of springboard toward next year where they probably would make the playoffs.
Okay, so you're a lot more generous than a lot of other people because a lot of people were projecting for the Devils to be a lottery team because they didn't think Lindy Ruff could be a good head coach. People were saying that Jack Hughes was injury prone. People said that Nico Hischier isn't a superstar. People were like, Jesper Bratt, he's nothing more than a glorified role player or whatever the case might be. And I was just like, no. I know that they missed on some key impact players during the course of the offseason, but I think this team did get better by default, and I'm expecting some decent things out of them because I projected for them to be a wild card team, or similar to what you said, worst comes to worst, they'll just miss it by the skin of their teeth. I did not think the Devils would take a couple steps backwards, especially now that they have some veteran assets added to the roster like Andre Palat, Eric Haula, Brendan Smith. So I was like, those guys can definitely have a voice in the locker room. Nico Hischier seems to be blossoming a little bit more. I felt like it was unfair to judge his development given how the COVID seasons have plagued him, injuries have plagued him. So I was like, Nico Hischier, he will definitely take a few steps forward. If Jack Hughes is able to remain healthy, then I think he can get over 100 points and get his name into the running for the Hart Memorial Trophy. So my thing going into the season was that the Devils, wildcard team, best case scenario, worst case scenario, maybe would be a lottery team, but that's if they were dealing with a lot of injuries. But digressing a little bit, they have surprised me in more ways than one. Going on a 13-game win streak, breaking a lot of franchise records, including 52 wins. A lot of players broke personal records like Jack Hughes. Jack Hughes was able to set a career high. Same with Nico Hischier in points. And also Jesper Bratt was able to tie his career high from last season. And Jack Hughes, speaking of franchise record, broke the single season points record for the Devils that was held by Patrick Elias for some time. Dougie Hamilton was able to surpass Scott Stevens for most goals in a single season by a Devils defenseman. And I know Vitek Vanecek, he did not have a good showing during the course of the playoffs. In fact, his goals saved above expected is ranked dead last amongst all goalies that were in the playoffs. But my thing for Vitek Vanecek is I can't take away from the fact that he had a great regular season, and he did something that was last done by Martin Brodeur, which is he was able to get 30 or more wins during the course of one single season. So this season was not a failure for the Devils. They were able to get out of the first round, which was my goal a few months ago prior to the trade deadline. I was like, if they're able to get past the first round, I'll be perfectly content because now you've shown everyone that you're legitimate, wasn't a fluke year, and you do have some potential.
No question about it. Definitely a big step forward for this team and its development. What kind of changes do you expect over the summer in response to this year's playoff run?
Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to open up the discussion as to what do the Devils need to do goaltending wise, because unfortunately, Akira Schmid, he was good. Wasn't perfect in this series, but he was good, and he did step up his game when it mattered most. Vitek Vanecek was god awful, and Mackenzie Blackwood was a healthy scratch throughout the course of the playoffs. So I don't expect for Mackenzie Blackwood to re-sign with the team. Vitek Vanecek is going to be a question mark. Like, do we put our trust in him once again? Because it seems like, and I don't follow the Washington Capitals religiously, but I do know for a fact that Vitek Vanecek, he had a good regular season campaign with them, but come the playoffs, he kind of disappointed a little bit. I know some circumstances didn't go his way, but I think that's why the Capitals organization was so willing to part ways with them. So my thing is like, do we trust Vitek Vanecek once again, because he does have a track history of not performing in the playoffs? So it's like, and I don't know if Akira Schmid, is he ready to become the full-fledged starter for Devils? It's a question that we legitimately need to have. And I think if Mackenzie Blackwood is out the door, the Devils need to look for another option at the netminder position. And I think they're going to definitely aim for a veteran. And then when it comes to the roster structure, it's going to go Meyer and Bratt. Try to re-sign them, and then you fill out the roster as you go. I don't anticipate for Damon Severson to resign. I don't anticipate for Ryan Graves to resign, because you got to make room for Shimon Nemeth and now Luke Hughes. Luke Hughes was able to show out during the course of the playoffs. Ryan Graves was not able to do so. I think Damon Severson will demand for too much money. And then for the forward aspect, obviously Eric Haula is set to become a free agent. Same with Tomas Tatar. But you also got to think about who's in the pipeline, and you got Alexander Holtz. So is it time to part ways with someone like Tomas Tatar, who's getting up there in age just a little bit, and maybe make room for the youngster and Alexander Holtz and give him a better chance of shining? It's a tough call, because Tomas Tatar, similar to a lot of his teammates, performed well in the regular season, but come the playoffs, wasn't really up to par. So it's definitely going to be an interesting offseason for the Devils. It's going to be uncharted territory for me, because now I got to think of it from the perspective of being contenders and not trying to rebuild. So it's like, it's going to be an interesting offseason for me. Silly season discussions are definitely going to be a little bit different, but I'm looking forward to it. So I'd expect for the Devils, once again, to focus on Timo Meier and Jesper Bratt, and then fill out the rest of the roster as they go.
All right, Trey, thank you so much. That does it for our Devils review here on the Locked On Road to the Stanley Cup. Be sure to subscribe to or follow Locked On Devils for free on YouTube, the SXM app, or wherever you get your podcasts. The Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.